Welcome back. I already gave myself a head start here because this was very time consuming. It took me about an hour just to do this. Okay, don't judge me. The contact is a Splat from RobbyDDD Makeup, and I do have a code for these contacts, so if you guys are interested, I'll leave a link for that down below, and I will leave all the other makeup that I am using down below, because this isn't really about the makeup, it's about the spooky, okay? So let's get spooky, shall we? I think we can all pretty much agree that the Salem witch trial period was kind of just awful. It was awful. Can we all agree that? Thank you. Yeah. So our story takes place not in Salem, but a tiny little village kind of in the area during that time frame. Okay? We have a young widow named Sarah who, you know, went to church every day. She was a good person. Then her husband had a very unfortunate accident while trying to chop wood. He kind of accidentally felled a tree on top of himself. Okay? And of course, you know, medicine being what it was in the 1600s, they couldn't really save him. You know, the church came and prayed over him, which was nice, but couldn't really do anything to help him out. And he was in a lot of pain and he was suffering. But the lady that lived on the farm next to them came over and she made a tea that she gave him. And the tea actually helped alleviate some of his pain. And Sarah remembered that. And she asked her, you know, how to make the tea, because he suffered for a few days before he died, and that was like the only thing that really relieved any of his pain. So the old woman taught her how to make the tea, what, you know, roots and stuff like that to use. And Sarah was hooked, you know? Like, who knew there's all these plants right out your back door that have all these healing properties? So she started going to the old lady's farm and kind of, you know, learning from her, because she didn't really know a lot of the healing properties, and they lived far away from like the nearest town. And she, you know, like when you get a cold in the winter, you could die from that stuff back then. So finding something that actually helped was kind of amazing. And that was all fine and good until the witch trials started. And of course, living in a smaller village, they heard about the witch trials. But, you know, they were just, oh my goodness, I can't believe like all these people are, you know, doing witchcraft and, you know, believing all the horrible, you know, news that they were hearing about these people. But never believing that, you know, something like that could happen in their tiny, sleepy little village. Right? Like, there's no way. Well, one winter, the coughs, you know, the colds got really, really bad. And the lady in the farm next door tended to a lot of, like, the, you know, farmers' children and stuff in the area, because they were all coming down sick, and she, you know, made a lot of teas and stuff and took them over to the farms whenever she found out that, you know, someone was having problems. And that seemed all, you know, neighborly, right? Until one of the kids said that she poisoned her. Gave her some kind of seizured fit. And she saw the devil. But the sheriff had to launch some kind of investigation. Had to be seen to be doing something, right? Like, there's this, you know, all this witchcraft happening up at Salem, and apparently one of them happened to be right here. So, of course, he brings in the little old lady. He brings in the child that accused her. And, you know, people start talking. And they're like, hey, we always see Sarah hanging around with her, picking plants out in the woods. Maybe she helped her. Maybe they're both conspiring with the devil, right? So poor little Sarah, you know, just trying to run her farm alone without her husband, thought she'd made a friend with her neighbor lady. Here's a bang on the door. And it's the sheriff. And he was bringing her in for questioning. And the questioning went more like, how long have you been consorting with the devil? To which, of course, she had to say, I don't consort. Oh, what are you talking about? You know, like she kept pleading her innocence, but that's not what they wanted to hear. So they threw her into a jail cell with the old lady. And the old lady also couldn't believe that they were there, that this was happening. Like, what? You know, who would say that they were witches? Who would believe such a thing? Well, every day the sheriff would come and he had asked them questions, trying to get a confession out of them. And every day they denied him that, because they weren't witches. But he didn't want to hear that. He didn't believe that. He couldn't believe that, you know? So then he thought, we can't have them in the same jail together because they're obviously going to be conspiring with each other, right? So he left the little old lady in the jail because, you know, she's old. And they built a special little light-proof box outside of the jail. And that's where they would lock Sarah up every night. No heat, no light, very little food or water. And then every morning, they'd bang on the door and demand a confession. They'd let her out if she gave them a confession. Angered that they weren't getting the reaction that they wanted out of her, they decided to start using force. They would bring her out, publicly flog her, demand a confession, and if she didn't confess, back in the box she went. So things finally got to the point where she thought, maybe if I do confess, they'll let me go. Like, if I just tell them what they want to hear, maybe this will stop. And so finally, you know, they come knock on her door, and she goes, okay, you know, I'm ready. I'm ready to confess. So the sheriff pulls her out of the box, and she, you know, says she's ready to confess. So the sheriff's thinking, okay, you know, we got one ready to go. So she does confess that she made teas out of herbs, you know, that she manipulated plants to help heal. Well, that's not what they wanted to hear either. So again, she was beaten and thrown back in her box. Things went on like this for a while. So finally, tired of the games, Sarah said, I will say whatever you want me to say. What do you want to hear from me? I'll say it. Just get me out of here. The sheriff came over with his smug little face and said, I will get a confession out of you. Here's what I want you to say. I, Sarah, am a witch. I have consorted with the devil. I have forsaken God and the morals that was taught to me by this community, and I planned and conspired to hurt those who did everything they could to help me as a sister of God. She didn't want to say that because that wasn't true, but she also couldn't stand spending any more time in that box. So she said it. The community was outraged that she would do such a thing, that she could, conspire against them like that. Never mind that it wasn't true, that those weren't her words. No one wanted to hear that. No one. They put her into the jail instead of the box now. The little neighbor lady was gone. No one would tell her what happened to her. Put her in the jail to await, not trial necessarily, but till they figured out what it was they were gonna do with her. And of course, while she was in the jail, she was still flogged daily out in the square and mocked, ridiculed, spat at. Well, the townsfolk had to decide whether or not they were going to handle this themselves or take Sarah to the higher-ups in Salem. And in the end, they decided they couldn't let their fun go to someone else. This was their witch. They found her. Then they had to decide, well, what are we going to do with her? And here's where things got interesting. Normally, witches in Salem, were hanged. Well, this town decided, no. We need to make an example so nobody else tries anything like this. So they decided they were going to burn her. Yeah. So the day of her reckoning finally came. The whole town gathered where they were flogging her every morning. But this time, there was a giant stake surrounded by wood. They tied her to the stake. The priest came, started a whole ceremony about the importance of living a pious life. And all the while, poor Sarah was just screaming from her little stake that she was innocent, that they all knew her. They knew that she was innocent. Why were they doing this? Well, they lit the fire, and the flames started creeping closer and closer to her, and they were all of the villagers condemning her. As the flames grew closer, something grew inside of her. She looked at the sheriff and she said, "You have made a grave mistake, and for that I will come for you from beyond the grave. Every generation, your firstborn daughter, when she reaches my age on this date, all that you have done to me will be done to them." By then the flames were creeping closer and closer to her body, and the heat was so hot she couldn't stand it. And all she could do was start screaming. But amongst the screaming, she kept yelling, "What you've done to me will be done to them. What you've done to me will be done to them." Years later, the sheriff finally found a wife. They had a couple of sons. But then, his wife finally had a daughter. And from that moment on, the villagers remembered the witch's words. And they waited. And then finally, when the daughter turned 24, the day of the witch's death, everyone waited to see what would happen. And sure enough, she got trapped in a barn, and somehow a lamp got knocked over, and the barn caught on flames. The timbers fell and beat her, and she burned to death. Every generation since then, firstborn females always had some sort of horrible, fiery accident. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, all the products will be down below, and I can barely move my face. Okay. This was a lot of fun to do. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.